which in an ideal world, absolutely, I agree, would be better.
Mhm.
But I mean, we need to end lockdown today.
Hi everyone, it's MJ the fellow actuary, and today I have a very special guest with me. I've got Peter Castleton, who is also a fellow actuary in the life department, and he has written a letter to our president saying that lockdown is actually a humanitarian disaster that is going to dwarf the COVID-19 crisis. So before we get into it, Peter, I think this is just a question that I get asked a lot of times, and hopefully we're going to be seeing people who aren't just actuaries watching this video. So maybe let's start off at a very simple question: is what actually is an actuary, and why should the president listen to us?
Well, the second part of the question is, I'm not sure who he listens to, so I don't know how we're going to get that one right. But I suppose an actuary is one of those professions that has no really neat definition. It's typically people that have been taught to think over longer time frames, how to process data, make assumptions, and essentially project outcomes. So based on statistics, but also real world, and fairly not the most sophisticated mathematics on earth, but fairly sophisticated mathematics that brings in a time dimension. So it's essentially, that's how I would mostly define it, and we tend to have a skill set that can be applied in many places, and I reckon it probably should be applied in public policy from time to time.
Okay, perfect. And I mean, so you've created a model. Let's maybe start off with what is the big findings. And I know that the heading of the letter kind of gives it away, but can you maybe just, what was the big finding of your research?
Yeah, maybe I'll take a step back. There's been a frustrating level of dialogue in this country for the past month or so, where people flippantly dismiss the economy as being this abstract thing that doesn't matter because lives are at risk. And intuitively, that's complete nonsense, because lives are sustained by the economy. You cannot dismiss one without the impact on the other. So I mean, and I don't want to claim that I knew what was going on, but it was fairly obvious there was a downside from a life expectancy, at least, point of view, from putting more people out of work. I mean, that's not a particularly contentious assertion. But when you dismiss the economy as this thing that can just be, I mean, you hear the comments like, I can't revive my grandparents, but the economy can be revived. Yes, it's kind of a shallow reading of the situation. So I thought, you know what? I mean, when I talk to other actuaries, I mean, no one disagrees. This is fairly straightforward. So I thought, well, how can I help frame the debate a bit differently? And let's not talk about the economy as some abstract thing, but let's rather talk about lives. This is not a trade-off of rich people smoking cigars in a cigar lounge and moaning about their portfolio. This is people who can't feed their kids. So based on my experience in life modeling, could we build a basic model that could get some feel of what this might cost lives over the longer term? And that's essentially where it started and how we got to where we got to.
Okay. And I'm taking it from, like I said, from the heading that the conclusion is that more lives can be saved by ending the lockdown or softening it than keeping it at this very hard state.
Yes, I mean that also shouldn't be surprising if you think it through, especially how long and hard our lockdown has been. So so I mean, I'm going to first give some bits and pieces away. The one is that the model's not going to be right, the one we built. This is surprising to people, but models are never right. They paint a picture, they give you an idea. I wish some British epidemiologists would acknowledge that is true of their models also, because so the model's not right. We simplified where we had to for expediency. You make the best of what you can do with the data in front of you. So the model's not wrong, but in going through the process of building it, knowing that there's limitations, I was actually trying to build a model to disprove the case. So to say, how low can I make this number of economic impact on lives? How low can I make it to kind of convince a skeptic that that the trade-off is valid? And it was still it's still an order of magnitude bigger cost of life years from this economic disaster. And I think, I mean, we can debate the assumptions. I mean, we've actually had a ton of engagement on this stuff over the last 24 hours with a lot of actuaries, largely supportive, but asking critical questions, which is what we would hope. Nothing's changed in the conclusion. Sure, we can maybe add a bit of fact here and there where we don't have confidence in our assumptions, but this is bad. I mean, it's bad. I think the real answer is going to be that it's more than 100 times worse. We were very conservative, and I think what the challenge is, there's multiple challenges we're facing, but this has to be on the consideration plates when we decide. And I say we, I mean, I have no power to drive decisions, but surely this has to be a decision that gets made. This has to be part of the decision trade-offs. Now, it's also probably worth understanding how public health policy typically works. So many times, public health officials and bureaucrats and whatnot are never faced with, are seldom faced with win-lose or win-win situations. It's very often lose-lose. We are in a situation where there's no good choice. There's no good outcome, right? It's bad or it's bad. So when you're faced with choices like that, typically what you should be doing is looking at the least harmful decision. There is going to be harm. I think no one denies the fact that COVID is something that we should be paying attention to and should be worrying about. And the deaths are going to come. The deaths are going to come. We're going to get to more than 100 a day. I'm convinced. I mean, it's inevitable if you just have a fairly high level reading on the data coming around the world. The deaths will come. We can't avoid that. We can delay a lot of it, but we can't avoid a lot of it either. So with that framework, and it sounds like it can be very cold-hearted to think like this, but I think we need to start thinking about what is going to be the least harmful, longer-term decision at this point. And you can't win them all. And this is what we're bringing to the debate, I suppose.
I mean, that's an interesting question, and something that I find, especially studying actuarial science, I mean, we tend to think in longer time frames.
Yeah.
And this might be something that maybe the public or the president or skeptics of the model will say is, it's that classic example. Do you want $100 now, or do you want $200 in a week's time? And most people tend to have a short-term focus, and they take the $100 now, even though every actuary is like, are you mad? The return on that is insane.
Yeah.
Go for the long one. So how do you communicate that the future long-term benefit of ending the lockdown is better when we live in a society, or even, let's say, politics? Politics tends to be short-term focused or 4 years focused because they want to get re-elected. How do you convince people that the longer term has got a higher weighting when they don't have an actuarial background?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, I suppose. So I don't really know. We've probably had the most interesting debate that's been spurred by this, which is something that I'm still struggling to get my head around because it's not a particularly actuarial debate. It's more philosophical. Is there such a thing as the time value of time? So is a year in 10 years' time worth less than a year today? Now, you could say there's contingent probabilities, but let's assume you have a 100% chance of enjoying that year. You're not going to die before then. So there's no discounting effect there. But for me, intuitively, but this might be the actuary in me, I said, no, they're worth exactly the same. It's an absurd concept that time has there's a time value of time. But it's not, it is philosophical. I suppose it depends on your outlook. I always think that as an optimist, I think things get better with time. So I actually would argue that future time's better than current time. And maybe it's an evolutionary thing. I think we do think in these terms when we make sacrifices for our children, for example, because them having a better outcome in future is worth some sacrifice today. So that's an interesting philosophical one. But I mean, we've had a suggestion from a couple of actuaries is that the discount our future time, halve it. I mean, let's say it's worth half. Okay, then it's 10 times worse.
Mhm.
I mean, you can do these numbers. You're not going to come to a conclusion that the trade-off is the right direction.
Yes.
But I do think that this has become a political. It's become political as opposed to backed by science. I mean, it doesn't. You don't have to really. You can just read a few of their decisions to see that this is not necessarily backed in any kind of science. So I, at risk of getting on the wrong side, I think there's a bit of a battle going on in the decisions that are getting made, and there's multiple things pulling that aren't necessarily in the best interest of South Africa and its society. And I mean, I don't have to go into those details. So I would hope that some more evidence, I suppose, that there's an actual cost coming from this thing. I would hope that this would help the rationalists who are trying to fight that battle in the decision-making corridors. So to be
Mhm.
perfectly honest, it doesn't really matter what you and I think. It doesn't matter what the general public think at a high level. There's a small group of people making the decisions here. It kind of matters how they think about it. So raising awareness of this thing helps because it helps it gets more questions asked, I suppose. And if people are asking the right questions, I mean, I'll be honest. When we first discussed this as a group, because there were a whole bunch of us working on this, we were like, guys, genuinely, what are the probabilities that this would make any impact? And we all said, well, slim.
Mhm.
I said, well, is it worth trying? I said, when you've got low chances, you still take them, I suppose.
Well, can I ask you a question on that? Because I see that you've submitted it under the acronym of PANDA, Pandemic
Yeah.
Data Analysis.
Yeah.
Why did you decide to go through this Panda framework or organization rather than through the Actuarial Society of South Africa or the doctors or another one that's got maybe a closer link to government?
So there's a few reasons, and I must be honest, I wasn't coordinating this entire effort, so it went back a little bit before I was involved. The Actuarial Society is now engaging with us quite a lot on this thing, and there's an outside chance that they might be able to adopt this as another way to think about the problem, which would be fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
They actually put a statement out today saying they welcome independent actuaries doing stuff like this. It's great, but obviously they didn't do it, so they can't stand behind it, which is the most fair comment we could ask for, actually.
Mm-hmm.
My impression is that this wasn't. This isn't an easy one to tackle, because I think everyone, and I mean I'm in business, so I can see it also. Everyone wants to be supportive of government because they recognize that these are difficult decisions that are being made, and there's no winning. So it's quite hard, I think, to come out and actually say this is a disaster. And I suppose that I think it was an expediency thing, to be honest. I think we could have gone the more bureaucratic route, which in an ideal world, absolutely, I agree, would be better.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, we need to end lockdown today if we could. I mean, that's kind of how dire the situation is, and going through a 6-week consultative process is just too late. You have to be able to move this work very, very, very fast. I mean, we went from a blank page to a report in 5 days. I mean, that's how hard we worked on this thing. So, we don't want to antagonize the society. Absolutely. I mean, I'm halfway jokingly expecting to be disciplined over this. But actually, it's a risk I would take all day long. I'd do it again. I don't regret it. And the discussion's been good. Very surprisingly, a lot of people have actually pinged us. Some we know, some we don't, who said, actually, the stuff you guys are doing has made me proud of being an actuary, because this is the kind of stuff we should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't put any blame on the society. I just get the impression that it was falling in. Maybe that's not too harsh to say falling on deaf ears, but I think a lot of the effort was going into building a COVID model to project the deaths, which I think is just one part of the equation. I think there needs to be this way of thinking about there are trade-offs, and currently the debate being framed in society, at least, is that the trade-off is minor inconveniences for the middle class for saving lives. And if that was the only trade-off, I would say lock us down for 2 years, honestly. But that's not the trade-off. That's a distraction. The fact that we can't exercise at any time is annoying, but that's not the problem. The problem is that, okay, let me frame it a bit differently. The problem is that there's a tab being paid here. So there's a bill. We're ordering off a menu, and someone has to pay this bill eventually. This crashed economy and lives lost. That bill is going to be disproportionately paid by the poor. There's no getting around that. So we reckon that 80% of the pain of lockdown will ultimately be borne by the most vulnerable in society. So it's not that everyone's, I mean, you could argue and say, well, if every citizen had to give up 3 months of life expectancy to flatten the curve, everyone would say, yeah, okay, fair enough. That's like in the future. That's not it. It's going to be 5 to 10 million people who get devastated by this thing. You and I may suffer inconvenience. We may get paid a bit less, but we just will cancel our DSTV, but not make a choice on what do I feed my kids today. It's a very different thing, and I think the chattering classes get massively distracted and happily make these kind of callous decisions or endorsements when they're not going to pay the tab for this thing. It's really annoying. And then we'll be very, very surprised in 5 years' time when the Gini coefficient has gotten worse and the poorest are even poorer than the rich. This was predictable. This is not capitalism. This is bad central planning, poor decision making at this point.
Well, I mean, this almost highlights a little bit of the lack of trust that society has at the moment. I mean, I was reading a bunch of articles, before this thing, and the one journalist was like, oh, we have to be aware that these actuaries have got a bias because they want the lockdown to end. And I was like, no, this is to help, like you were saying, it's the poorer part of society. But the lack of trust is almost like, oh, the businessmen want to end it because they've got the most to lose.
Yeah, I'll give you my agenda. Okay, so I've got no skin in this game. Okay, maybe put it. I've got skin in this game. I've got parents who are close to 70. They're not. I mean, I think I understand the COVID risk pretty well. They're not at risk. They're in the older category. They're at more risk than me and my kids, for example. But they're not sitting there with 3 comorbidities. They're not that at risk. So, and I mean, my first cousin almost died in New York 2 weeks ago from COVID. So this is not an abstract concept to me. She luckily survived, but I mean, it's very real. So I honestly, I mean, my business is actually doing relatively well through this period. We will take some pain because the economy is going to hit it. But ultimately, we're doing fine. I'm not losing. I will lose future income, obviously, but it's fine. I mean, I can make ends meet. I'm not going to lose my house. I'm not going to lose my job. I've got nothing to gain, particularly personally, from ending lockdown. Okay, so I think that's quite important. I mean, my kids need to go back to school. I mean, that would be. I mean, I can see it. I can see the psychological effects it's having on them. But we would make that sacrifice if the trade-offs were right. So I've got nothing to gain. I'm not going to make $1 million. I'm not betting. I don't have a short running off the JSE. I've got no money. This is actually costing me. Putting your neck on the line for this kind of stuff is actually it's a net cost for me. So but I mean that's not going to make people trust you. They will. I mean, I've been accused of being right wing and libertarian at the same time. So, but I mean, whatever. That's fine. I think people have. I think lockdowns become a religion, and we're pissing on people's belief systems here, and that is always going to provoke an emotional reaction. So it is what it is.
Well, I mean, it's interesting you talk about, like, and we were alluding to the politics earlier. So I watch a lot of YouTube, specifically American. I'm fascinated by American politics, and it's almost come to the stage where the Republicans are like trying to dismiss or underplay the coronavirus, and the Democrats are trying to make it an even bigger deal than it is. Yeah. And I think both are quite dangerous. And of course, what hits on YouTube is the more extreme. So you'll get some extreme statements coming from maybe a Republican, and that's the one that's viewed, or an extreme statement from a Democrat, and that's the one that's viewed. And this middle, the logical, rational center is kind of being ignored because it's not, excuse the pun, but it doesn't have to go viral. With YouTube, you need to have something a little bit emotive, make people angry in order for it to spread. So it's almost like the logical debate. Like this video here, I'm not expecting it to get thousands and thousands of views because it's not designed to be controversial. It's designed to be educational, to try and say, well, this is the middle voice that we have. For me, one thing, and I don't know, maybe this is just ignorance on my side, is in South Africa, is there, I mean, like I said, in America, they've got the Republicans that are anti-lockdown and the Democrats that are pro-lockdown, in a very simplistic summary there. But in South Africa, I mean, are we seeing that as well? Like, is this something that you also guys considered, the fact that the DA also had a plan for lockdown and maybe the ANC wants to go this other way? Are there political forces at play, or is that beyond the scope of the model?
So, I mean, we weren't trying to play any politics, so I can almost give my personal view is that if I was a political leader and playing the political game, there's no ways I would be calling very, very, very hard to end lockdown. And I'll tell you why. The one is that no one's denying that the deaths are coming. Okay, so they're saying peaks in September or whatever, it might be August, might be October, whatever. The deaths are coming. We're going to see thousands of South Africans die with COVID, irrespective of what we do with lockdown. Okay, so the one fallacy is that lockdown's saving those lives. No. Lockdown's buying time. That I think needs to come. So what's going to happen is I think the politicians have put themselves in a very tricky spot by extending this lockdown for as long as it's been, because the deaths are coming, and people are going to naturally associate the deaths with this lockdown. But that's kind of ludicrous. So I wouldn't be sitting in the DA saying end it right now, because when the deaths come, who gets the blame? Okay, and they're coming. So that's the one thing. The other one is that I don't want to name parties now, but there are some parties that will do better when the poor are doing worse, and they are very pro lockdown. So I don't think that's coincidental.
I know what political party you're talking about.
Yeah. So I mean, they're gonna make hay when what's opposite of sun shines. They're gonna make hay when the rain pours, basically. So it's very political, and the problem is that, I mean, I've followed a lot of the Swedish stuff, and I don't necessarily endorse their model or anything like that, but they at least speak with some clarity. And one of the things that they've been saying a lot is that how the hell do you get out of a lockdown politically? How do you get out of one? Because it's always going to make the deaths come a little bit faster, and they're going to come anyway. So once you've made this very, 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 I won't call it rash, but impactful decision, how do you reverse it? I mean, how do you politically pull that off? And I think the other thing I think South African government's gotten wrong, so they've gotten it right to a point, but now it's gone off the other side of the fence, is that this virus is being spoken about like it's the Black Death. Like, if you go outside, you will probably die. And that's just bullshit. That is just simply not true. So you have a population of South Africans who are genuinely living in fear that the Black Death is outside. And it cannot be further than the truth. People will die. It's fairly predictable which are the high-risk groups if we can look at plenty of data coming from around the world. Most people, probably 60 to 90%, most people won't even notice if they get it. Those that get, I mean, then the slices get smaller and smaller. I don't want to conflate this with flu, but if you are in a high-risk group, this is a really serious thing. It can smack you. At some points, I estimated it in the high-risk groups, it's 70 times worse than flu. And that was that was a back-of-the-envelope calculation. For my kids, this is better than flu. They're not going to die. But now what the government has done is like, you're going to die. I heard an advert on the radio earlier saying, staying at home, go outside and you risk you or killing your loved ones. Such ridiculous messaging happening. So what lands up happening is, let's say we open the economy now. How many people want to go back to work with the Black Death out there? So what I say the government did well is awareness. Being more aware that there is this thing out there that can have quite bad outcomes is really good. That's kind of great public policy. Convincing them they're going to die becomes counterproductive. That's why you see people becoming, I mean, they get rabid if they see someone walking 10 minutes after the window of walk. That's because they think it's somehow going to lead to a death. It's just insane.
Yeah.
So we're sitting in a kind of a really, really, really tough spot. But the thing is that I think we're going to have. So I mean, maybe another debate we've had with some of the brighter engagers since yesterday is saying, oh, we've had economic slowdowns before, and periods of austerity have seldom led to material changes in mortality. So it seems like our assumption is bullshit. It's fair enough. It's a good point. This is not a business cycle type recession. This is business annihilation. It's businesses going extinct. It's not them slowing down and maybe there's a bit less revenue. Many of these jobs are going to be lost for as good as forever. We use the word semi-permanent. This is not just a cycle. This is a depression we're going into. This is millions of people who won't have work and food. A government that's incredibly weak on a fiscal side and increasingly weak because of lockdown to be able to support these people. So it's a double whammy. So this is, you can't compare this to 2008, although we did use that data to kind of get a feel for where the jobs would be lost. And I think that's probably still a valid assumption. But these jobs are going to be lost in bigger numbers and for longer periods, and there's going to be less ability to support these people, and that is just going to lead. It's I don't know. I don't want to predict how bad this is going to get, but it can be some pretty scary outcomes and quite visual. So one of the arguments we make in the paper is that it's not going to be obvious when I mean I dug around in some data, and there's a few thousand kids a year, and I can't remember the exact number. It was 8,000 or 40,000. Is it not a tiny number of kids a year that get hospitalized in this country from malnutrition in 2019? Okay, so it's a serious number. That's easy to ignore, but when that number becomes 250,000 kids who are suffering from malnutrition, I think this thing is not going to be so much. I mean, the poor are doing a little bit worse, but that's fine. No one really notices. I think we're going to notice. I think the lines for food are going to get very, very long. I mean, I would encourage people to phone their local church or mosque. Just phone and say, how many families are you feeding now? I mean, I phoned the one my parents go to down the road, and they said 3,000 extra families a day from a month ago. And that's a tiny little church in a tiny little town. 3,000 a day. This is already getting bad. And this matters. I mean, and it's entirely predictable, which is so frustrating. This extended lockdown doesn't need an actuary to figure out the numbers. This was fairly predictable when we extended the first hard lockdown. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have done the first one. I think the data was scratchy. We weren't sure if this was going to annihilate everyone with HIV. So it was probably wise to buy us some time. Definitely wise, because we also got the PPE. Hospital workers are at risk. But now I don't see how politically we can end this. And I must also say that I will take zero pleasure 2 years from now, 6 months from now, to say, hey, look, I was right. That I don't want to be right. This is I don't want this humanitarian crisis. I was hoping someone would find a major flaw in our arguments, which hasn't happened yet. Might still come. That would be fantastic. If someone says, dude, you're thinking about this thing 100% wrong, everything will be fine, I would be thrilled to be wrong. I take no joy from this message. So I don't know. I'm very worried, and I think another way to think about it is that in economic recovery, because there will be a recovery. Okay, when we open again, we will see year-on-year growth, maybe half of what we lost, because that's just that. Obviously, when things are working, there would be some kind of recovery. But the recovery, I don't know how to put this in mathematical terms, but the recovery period grows exponentially longer the longer you're in lockdown. So meaning a week of lockdown versus 2 weeks of lockdown, the recovery is not double. The recovery is more than double the time. So 4 months of lockdown is going to be significantly longer to get over, and we may not get over it for years than 4 weeks of lockdown. So the costs are compounding. It's like having payday loans and using loans to pay the loans. We digging ourselves deeper and deeper into a hole here. And so I don't know. I'm just hoping that if we're using the government's framework, go to level 2. Like, I don't know what, I mean, the one question I asked myself when we extended the first hard lockdown at that 3-week period, this is a question I would have loved to ask Cyril. I said, what data would you have needed at this point to not extend? Because the news was perfect. We still had no deaths, essentially. So firstly, it's full of shit because you were always going to extend it because the news couldn't have been better at that point in time. And the world was showing this thing wasn't going to kill 3% of the people that got it, which was already an absolutely criminal assumption that the WHO made, which you should have known back then that wasn't going to happen. So I don't think, I would love the government to play more open cards with us, honestly.
Well, that's the thing. I was like properly shocked. I remember when Cyril came to give that announcement. And my personal view was, okay, we've done the 21-day lockdown plus this extension. It's going to end, and maybe there's a few rules in place. But I was thinking, you know what? After being in lockdown for such a long time, the awareness, like you say, it's there. Let's say people my age. We're not going to be flocking to nightclubs or to bars if they're overcrowded. We're going to be very cautious. It would maybe go out, have a small gatherings, but slowly get back to life. I didn't think, we would go and have a big stadium celebration with millions of people, which is almost like what, which is kind of what the assumption is. So I was very shocked by the thing, and it's weird. I also, and I don't know if I'm talking on behalf of my generation, but there was a depression element. It was like, oh, we were told it was going to be this 21 days plus 2 weeks or whatever. We've done our part. Now, where's our reward? Geez, we can't even smoke. We can't even drink. It was like we're punished for doing the right thing. But
I think you're right. So I think what I would like to add to that is that certain governments have taken different approaches. And I think there's two kind of general approaches you can take. The one is that you can treat your citizens like complete morons and impose your will on them, or you can treat them like they are not idiots, and actually with the right level of information, they will be able to make better decisions at a micro level than you can ever make at a central level. And maybe this is now a political ideology coming through, but I mean that's where in this country the government thinks we are too dumb to make decisions. Now, if you were told, firstly, I mean, I could even picture it in my head. Here's a little scorecard. Work out what risk group you're in. It's got age and it's got count how many of these diseases you have and then put yourself in a category. I mean, you could make this that anyone could understand it. Say, oh, well, I'm in a green category, so I'm at low risk. Okay, that's good information. Versus I'm in a red category, I'm probably at high risk. Take extra care. Then I know, okay, I'm living with an elderly person. I need to take extra care on their behalf, or not. So treat your people like they are not morons. I think that goes a long way. But we're being treated like idiots. I mean, you're seeing the police lock up people who are flouting the regulations, but it's just, guys, this is not the way to go. I don't know. It's just frustrating. I think this is just the biggest own goal I think we're going to ever witness. And make no mistake, I think I can confidently say that being pro-lockdown at this point, knowing what we know, is the anti-poor position. Pro-lockdown is anti-poor. The poor are going to suffer. You may take some pain, and your business may shut down. It all sucks, but you're not going to be paying the bill for this thing.
Well, I maybe want to talk to you just something about that, about being anti-poor and everything. And it is one thing that you do talk about in the 22-page document. And it's something that I think maybe I was fed misinformation, or maybe we can clarify here. But I kind of got the message that if people have HIV and corona, it's going to be a double dose and it's going to be like a horrendous experience, or HIV, TB and coronavirus. your findings were that that's not necessarily the case. Am I being correct there, or can you maybe talk a little bit more about
Yeah.
HIV and corona?
Yeah, sure. So there's who know. The big question is we don't know for sure, but there's evidence. There's enough evidence to suggest that it's not as bad as we might have feared when we first went into lockdown, which is kind of why I think that the lockdown decision was probably still prudent, given that we didn't know. So there's a few kind of, I don't know, what do you call them? Reference points. You can't rely that heavily on them, but a country like Indonesia has apparently quite a high TB prevalence. Maybe it's Malaysia. I can't remember. But there's like a Southeast Asian nation with a fair amount of TB who've now gone through their wave of corona deaths, and there was no noticeable impact on the mortality. In addition, Italy has a relatively large immigrant population. That subpopulation does have exposure to TB, and they fared better than the average Italian adjusted for age. So there's these data points that suggest it's not that conclusive. And we've chatted to a couple of doctors who said, well, TB presents in the mechanism ABZ. What they're seeing from this virus is it wouldn't necessarily lead to worse outcomes, but we don't actually know. If I had TB, I'd be careful. Let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. On the HIV side, I think this is a massive opportunity, actually. So people who are on their ARVs and being disciplined about it and that kind of stuff, they as far as we're concerned, they pose no extra risk. Their immune systems are fine. Most of them you can't even or a lot of them you can't even pick up the HIV anymore. The ARVs are so good. So I think this is a massive opportunity that the government's kind of missed to go and drive that message home. If you are HIV positive and not taking your meds, take them, because you are at risk. Clearly, if you have a low CD4 count and you get a virus, that's what HIV does. It's an immune disease. So here's a massive opportunity to drive. I mean, that would genuinely have saved lives. Genuinely save lives at a zero cost. Basically, I mean, obviously the cost of the drug, but effectively not a real cost. So people who and I mean, we did get one anecdotal piece of evidence that the demand for ARVs has gone up. So that's great, fantastic, but that was a byproduct of the panic. It would have been up even more if there'd been some kind of focused response. So I think we know enough now to say we're not. I mean, I wouldn't bet my reputation on it, but it's not as severe as it's unlikely to be as severe as we would expect. Now, a lot of people are drawing some conclusions from the deaths we've had here. And if anyone understands sample sizes, you can't draw a lot from 140 deaths. But so if people have asked me my opinion on this one, I think there's some good news in that data. At least it's not foolproof because the sample size is bad news is too small. But I would take the good news over bad news at this point. So the number of people in that sample group, for example, who have died, who have TB as a complication and HIV as a complication, seems to be lower than the population prevalence. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's a bit lower than the average. That's most likely just noise in a small data sample. But I would be very worried if half of those people had HIV and TB, because that's still too small a sample to draw a conclusion. But that's quite a red flag. So I don't know. I would actually, when I say these are the comorbidities to look out for, I would add those still. I would say if you're HIV positive or hypertensive or obese or you need to consider yourself in the high risk group, because things like that, it's actually better to be safe than sorry. Because again, the harm is not as drastic to be wrong on the wrong side of that thing.
Mm-hmm. So what would you then say is the solution? To just go to lockdown level 2, how that's been outlined? Or I saw you said something about letting people up, but maybe cocooning the elderly and these people
cocooning is a word that gets misinterpreted, and maybe we shouldn't have used it. We don't mean imprison the elderly. It's not lock them up, because people have already said to us, like, basically, how do you dare you tell them to lock me up? I'm old. Calm down. That's not what we said. So I think the way to frame the question is do as much open as much of the economy that you can safely. That's kind of the way to think of it. Versus hard lockdown was, what's the minimum we have to do to make sure people don't get pissed off? It's a very different way to frame it. I'm maximizing, they're minimizing, but safety is still the concern. So there's certain things that I think make sense. I'm not on the balance of probabilities. In general public, wearing a face mask is likely to be good. It's good. Okay. So, but if it isn't good, there's no harm, right? So it's a zero harm inconvenience to force a face mask on the probability that it actually is a good idea. So I would say public places have the face masks. Have your hygiene. Have your hygiene everywhere. So entering the malls, spray the hands, drive the awareness of the stuff. So I mean, the Swedish guys are saying, well, the best way to fight this disease is to wash your hands. I mean, that's what we were doing before lockdown. It's like wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. So I think we could also be creative. So I mean, this was not. I'd love to claim this idea because I think it's quite an interesting way to think about it. Is that incentives drive behavior. That's kind of, you can take that to the bank. If you get the incentives right, people drive behavior. So what if we said, if you are over the age of 65, when the risk starts adding up, and you are on the social old age pension, we will triple your social old age pension for the next year. Okay, so we'll take it from whatever it is, $1,000 to $3,000. Now, what would that do? Firstly, the people would most likely try and take better care of the person who's getting this income, because it's an income. These people would also, who significantly, we acknowledge that, I mean, not in the paper, but it's not a hidden fact that HIV ravaged a whole bulk of a population that is kind of parent age. I mean, like, not everyone's parent age is big. You know what I mean? Like in their 40s now. And there's a lot of elderly people who are raising and looking after the kind of orphans from that lost generation of however many HIV deaths we had, a few 100,000. So by giving those people more money, they can actually start affording alternatives to having the kids under 100% care of them. I don't mean ship them off to orphanages, but they have now some financial freedom to maybe manage their risk a bit better. And ultimately, I think you can start treating people like they're not idiots, and say, wash your hands. We'll make sanitizers free on taxis and at taxi ranks and at shops, and masks will be free. And that stuff is so low cost in the grand scheme of things. And then I think you need to get the message through as well that if you're lifting lockdown, you have to say, guys, the deaths are coming. We can't avoid this thing. They either come in 3 months' time or 4 months' time, but they are coming. And this is how we're going to handle it. And I think we bought enough time now that our hospitals should be ready. I do have a bit of a fear that because of the positioning of this virus as being kind of Black Death, that it's more likely to have people abandoning post when the virus starts becoming a bit more front and center. So I'm a little bit worried that our hospitals might, I don't want to use the word collapse, but our hospitals might become under strain should staff start fearing working despite the PPE, which I think is a real risk. So, but I mean, there's no easy solutions here. I do think, I mean, if I had to look at their framework, I'd say go to level 2 and apply what you would do there. So don't have stadiums open, don't have large crowds. Make sure that there's the high density workplaces, make a plan, like 1.5 meters per person, and keep driving the message home about hygiene and keeping your face clean and your hands clean. And you'd probably go a long way to still flattening the curve like that than what we're doing now. I don't think it would be materially different, to be honest.
And then maybe let's have one more question to end off, and after you answer this, you can maybe give some closing remarks. Right. But yeah, Peter, what would you say if, let's say, government replies back to you and says, sorry, we have to stay at lockdown level 4? What can we do to assist in that, whether it's universal basic income, it's another bailout, or some lowering the interest rates or raising taxes. What would you say is the second best solution?
So I think, okay, there's a couple of there's one solution I did think of. The other, honest, there's no solutions here, to be honest. I think I mean, what Key Sweater came out yesterday and said revenue is going to be down 20% or something. I mean, the government doesn't have the money. So the one thing I would do is there's a lot of people, savers, so retirement fund savers, who are now out of work, or they've had jobs cut, or they've been furloughed, or whatever. They need money. If I was Treasury, and I was like, my employer will probably kill me for this because they wouldn't like this solution. But I would say we actually don't.
Yeah. Is it opening the pension funds?
Like, I would open it. Yeah. I would say. I'd actually say, don't even do anything clever. Say, you can take a withdrawal for the next 6 months. You can take as much as you need, and we will tax it like we would have taxed it when you took it at retirement. Okay. So what does that do? That gives billions. I mean, I would take my money not because I need it, but because I'm scared that more will get stolen later. So what does that do? That firstly, that gives some cash in the hands of people to potentially stimulate the economy. Secondly, it gives the government a huge amount of money, and it actually accelerates taxation for them. So they're not going to get more; they're just going to get it now instead of when people retire over time. Obviously, the downside is that these people's savings, if they go and spend it on crap, are going to be they're going to be in a little bit more trouble at retirement. So there is that is probably the biggest downside. But frankly, when you start weighing off the alternatives of proper poverty related stuff, I think it's probably, on the balance of probabilities, not the worst trade-off. So that's the one thing I would do. The other thing, I think we're going to have, I mean, I'm seeing it happening already, but I think civil society is going to go a long way to help the poor out of this thing. I think South Africans are generous. South Africans do get involved across all races. These are no racial lines here. So I think you'll end up finding that there will be an enormous amount of support from people that can afford to support it to help feed the poor for a period. And I think the government should actually just, okay, a lot of people don't trust the government. I wouldn't say, I would think of saying, here are some private schemes or whatever, they're NGOs. We've looked at them all. We can check their finances, that 90% of what they get goes to the end consumer, whatever the number needs to be. And if you donate, all of it's tax-free. So I mean, even encourage it like that. So it may even already be like that, but encourage the people that can help to help, because that's going to be needed. And I worry that if that doesn't happen, no amount of running the printing press of the money printer is going to help. I don't know. I read a paper last night by another actuary who wrote something about this hole we're in as a delinquent government finance department. There's not a lot of solutions. Buying bonds in the primary market is effectively like printing money, as far as I'm concerned. So we might have to inflate our way out of that problem, and that's bad. I mean, that's more bad it's bad for everyone. But we may have no choice. And I don't think we can also rely on the world saving us, because they are now going to also come out of this thing very weak.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think we're in for some pain either way. And I think it's going to dwarf what we're seeing in the next few months on the COVID side. Sure.
Well, it is a bit of I guess that's a bit of a dark tone to end off the podcast. But hopefully Cyril reads the letter. Hopefully he responds. He calls you guys in. And I must say, if you guys need any extra human calculators to crunch some numbers, I mean, I am here, so I'd love to help and help anyway. And I mean, we're sitting on quite a lot of actuaries watch this channel. So if you do need human capital, I'm sure we can rally the troops to crunch any numbers that need to be crunched, right? Python script or Arco. So just let us know if we can help. But other than that, I just want to say thank you so much for taking your time, putting your neck on the line to stand up and say, hey guys, this is actually a bigger problem and this is a potential solution. So Peter, thank you so much. And of course, thank you for being on the channel and sharing your thoughts. To the subscribers who are watching, if you guys have any comments, please let me know in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys soon. Thanks for watching. Cheers.